It is September 11th, 2024, and the Biden administration is reportedly considering lifting their restrictions on Kiev's use of long range weapons on Russian territory. This escalation comes at the exact same time that you have Russian forces making significant advances in the Donbass region, specifically around the key Ukrainian stronghold of Kursk. And you have Kiev struggling to keep up, not just in the Donbass, but also over in Russia's Kursk region, as they are weeks into an incursion there. And you have Russia now launching an offensive on its end, targeting Kiev's troops that have gone into its territory, who have crossed over its borders. There are a lot of moving parts here and developments all around, so much so that even the Western media is admitting it. So we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier. Let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is international relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda. Mark, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Rachel, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Always good to have you. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, because when asked if the U.S. would lift restrictions on Ukraine's use of long-range weapons on Russian territory, Biden said that his administration is, quote, working that out now. Now, this comes as Axios is citing anonymous sources who are claiming that Washington intends to lift those restrictions. So what do we know, and what do you make of the timing here? I mean, is Zelensky's incessant whining finally paying off?
Yeah, so first of all, with regards to the timing, I think part of it is desperation, right? The Kursk incursion, Russia started a counteroffensive in the last couple of 2 days. They've already taken back 10% very quietly of all of the both the number of settlements and the territory that the Kiev regime seized in this strategic backwater of the conflict. And they have simply proven unable, even after Russian reinforcements, Ukrainian reinforcements, including troops pulled back from the Kursk region. They were pulled from the Donbas to Kursk, and then now thrown back from Kursk to the Donbas, to the Pokrovsk. And it doesn't make any difference. Russian forces are just steamrolling them there. The operational crisis continues, and casualties are through the roof. So the battlefield situation is only getting worse. So I believe there's a bit of desperation here that is helping fuel this decision. There is the question of, according to the Western media, Russia will shortly be receiving short-range ballistic missiles, FOF 360s from Iran. It's not impossible, but it's also possible this is simply being used as an excuse for allocating it. And it has to be said, who's really running the White House at this point? Is it Joe Biden? Is it Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan? We just heard last week from Lloyd Austin that the military utility of allocating these allowing for long-range strikes using U.S. weapon systems in Russia is very little, because Russia has moved all of its airfields and command centers out of range of the ATACMS. 90% of them, he said, and the rest is not worth the effort. And we also heard from the Pentagon, as reported on CNN, that the Kiev regime should not expect any more large shipments of missiles, because the Pentagon has a finite supply of them. They're not being produced fast enough. I'm not sure any of them are actually being produced now. Supposedly, they're trying to restart ATACMS production after more than a decade, but I haven't heard that they've yet actually produced any more ATACMS. And the Pentagon wants these missiles, like all long-range missiles, saved for the war with China in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits that the U.S. is intending to provoke within the next few years, because that is going to be entirely a naval and air war fought largely with missiles and drones. And they are very, very afraid in the Pentagon of what they call a growing missile gap with China. So they're not going to get long range, large numbers of these ATACMS to carry out this policy with. It is clear that the Pentagon does not approve of this. And what's more, Russia has made perfectly clear that if this goes through, right, they understand that that operating long-range systems, this would be the ATACMS, or possibly also sending the air-launched JASSMs cruise missiles as well, regardless that it is U.S. Weapon specialists actually using these weapons. And the same things with the British Storm Shadows and the French Scalp. And we've heard this confirmed from no less a person than the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, who admitted as much in his excuse why not to send Germany's own Taurus cruise missiles. And we've also heard in these leaked conversations with German generals plotting to blow up the Crimean Bridge about the British and Americans on the ground operating their weapon systems. Maybe they could fire our Taurus for us too. So Russia would consider that an act of war. They made that perfectly clear. If you launch these long-range strikes, the implausible deniability, the fig leaf of a Kiev regime proxy, maybe there's a Ukrainian in the room when you fire these weapons at us, but it will be you making a missile strike on us, and we will retaliate. They made that perfectly clear. They said we reserve the right to strike within the US or the UK or any of your assets around the world. Now, personally, they also said that they could transfer long-range weapons to U.S. adversaries. And I think the second is a lot more likely. In fact, CNN ran a report just 5 weeks ago, the last time there was a big concerted media political push to get these long-range strikes approved, that Russia was already ready to transfer long-range anti-ship missiles to the Houthis, to the Ansar movement in Yemen, and the U.S. talked them down from it. The U.S. and the U.K. and Saudi Arabia talked them down from it. Now, if this was true, and we'll have to take CNN's word for it on this, and Russia was ready to do that, now if they're bringing up this issue again, of course, Russia will just go right back and do that and possibly transfer it to other adversaries. So if they approve this, Russia said the consequences will be immediate and will be felt on both sides of the Atlantic, whatever that means. But it's very possible that if these long-range strikes happen in Russia using U.S. and British and other Western missiles, that we will very likely see U.S. and perhaps British naval ships destroyed in the Red Sea using advanced Russian anti-ship missiles. And, well, the Biden administration will be responsible for all that loss of life and will be that much closer to direct NATO-Russia confrontation.
Yeah.
The other thing that should be mentioned is that these things actually are not a game changer. The ATACMS have already been used in Russia for half a year, right? Maybe not deep in Russia, but there's a reason for that. Just like with the Excalibur rounds, the ground-launched small-diameter bombs, the Storm Shadows already, Russian electronic warfare. The Wall Street Journal ran an article. The U.S. advanced weapons systems work in Ukraine until they don't, because Russia adapts. And they have the best electronic warfare and air defense systems in the world. They build a profile of these weapons. It's kind of like Star Trek and the Borg. You get 3 shots with your phaser, and by then the Borg shields have adapted and they're useless. So that is the threat. And that's why you don't hear about the ATACMS or the Storm Shadows now, because they've been rendered largely ineffective on the battlefield. So anywhere Russia has electronic warfare or air defense, and they can't defend everywhere. Russia's a very big country, but they will, of course, defend their high-value targets. And with limited numbers of these weapons that the Pentagon is willing to transfer, and very little strike capability because of Russian defenses, not a game changer. So I see this more as the Kiev regime reaching for the next, perhaps final rung on the escalation ladder before reaching the holy grail that they've been reaching for all this time of direct NATO-Russia confrontation, because that's all that's left at this point.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you bring that up, because I mean, I'm old enough to remember when the Biden administration claimed that they wouldn't send not just long-range weapons to Ukraine, but Abrams tanks, F-16 fighter jets. And they claimed at the time, that would put us really close to direct war with Russia, right? That would risk escalating tensions. And given that, as you were pointing out, I mean, we're not talking about any magical wonder weapons that are going to change the course of the conflict whatsoever here. So what do you make of the fact that the U.S. is actually marching up to the brink of direct war with Russia when they're already not winning as is? I mean, is all of this really for Ukraine? Is all of this because they think that Russia isn't going to fight back? How do you see kind of the grander scale and the neocons from Washington to London who are making these decisions?
I think a lot of it is desperation at this point. They have no way to back down. They have no exit ramp. They cannot be seen as losing this conflict to Russia. They have said many times, their U.S. global leadership is on the line. The rules-based order, we make the rules, we give the orders, is on the line. Boris Johnson said it outright. U.S.-led Western global hegemony is on the line. At least they believe so, because they believe in a modern dominoes theory that if they lose to Russia, a country they have derided as Nigeria with snow in Ukraine, then China will take back its island province of Taiwan. Iran will attack Israel. Not that they're going to do that anyway. And cats and dogs will live together on the street and will be, at the brink of Armageddon, or at least the end of U.S. hegemony and the, shattering of their own ideology and identity of U.S. and Western exceptionalism. So they can't even conceive of an exit ramp. So really, escalation is all they have left. There are some arguments that they intend to escalate to force Russia to negotiations. I don't actually see this as that much of a military escalation. I don't think Russia will be impressed by this. I don't think Russia will be afraid by this. If they're hoping that attacks like this and like the recent drone attacks will frighten the Russian civilian population, some type of political terrorism, it hasn't worked up until now. Why do they think that this will suddenly work now? I think they're grasping at straws. I think the Biden administration is rudderless. I don't think Joe Biden is actually making decisions now. I think it's Antony Blinken and Jake Sullivan. And frankly, I think they're in over their head and they don't know what to do.
Yeah, it's that weird point where you look at them and you go, okay, have you just completely refused to study your opponent whatsoever, or any of the history there, really anything about Russia? But as all of this is happening, I mean, it's no secret that Russian forces are advancing in the Donbass, getting closer and closer to the key Ukrainian stronghold of Kursk. And you even have the Wall Street Journal with an article out today titled "Ukraine Pressed to Think About a Plan B for War with Russia," in which they say that as Russia advances, Western officials want Kiev to spell out realistic goals. Now, I don't know when Kiev's goals have ever been realistic here, but what does the situation look like on the front lines? Are Kiev and Washington and company likely panicking with the advances that they're seeing from Russia right now?
Yeah, so first of all, it has to be said that in the Kursk region, Russia has launched a counteroffensive in the last couple of days and already recovered some 10% of the settlements and territory that the Kiev regime held. So that's going on in the north. In the south and central Donbass, and really, I think we have to, because these two fronts are now so close together, it's essentially one big battle. And Russia is moving in on Pokrovsk and Sleboda and Karakhova. And these small cities, towns are the transport hubs and logistics and supply centers of the entire Kiev regime forces, north and south, in the Donbass region. Right? There's transport, there's railroad networks there, and major highways. And if Russia takes this, then it will be like cutting an artery, right? The flow of blood to the rest of the Kiev regime's forces in the Donbass. And everyone understands this. This is an operational crisis at this point because the Kiev regime has not been able to stop the Russian advance in this direction since they broke through the Kiev regime's forces earlier this year at Avdiivka. They just keep going. And on top of that, past Pokrovsk, there's nothing. There's no major settlements there. It's flat, open steppe all the way to the Dnieper River. There's nothing else that can be defended, either in terms of topography or in terms of settlements, major settlements that can be defended. So that is a big problem. And as this is going on, the southernmost of the Kiev regime's fortified locations in the Donbass, kind of the anchor of their forces in the south, has been Ugledar, which is pretty much a fortified town on a hill. And it has repelled Russian advances 4 or 5 times earlier, right? Earlier in this conflict. But now Russia has been able to choke off its supply lines in the north, and they're actually moving to encircle, or at least partially encircle, Ugledar now. They just took Vodanoye, a town just to the northeast of Ugledar in the last few days. And there appears to be no stopping them at this point. The Kiev regime has tried to rush reinforcements, and they're just not holding. CNN is doing stories on the Kiev regime troops facing low morale and deserting in the tens of thousands, and not being able, these new conscripts not being willing to fight on the front. And it just does not look good for them. So it's a very bad battlefield situation. It's only going to get worse. And when Russia takes, not if, but when Russia takes Pokrovsk in the next few weeks or few months, depending on how much the Kiev regime wants to waste trying to hold on to it in what seems to be an impossible situation, that it will spell the end of the Kiev regime military presence in the Donbass. It will be very hard for them to hold on to their last defensive arc further to the north of Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, and Konstantinovka. It will just be a matter of time at this point, and everyone, even in the West, will understand that. And then the question is, well, what's next? And very likely it will be Zaporozhye city and Kherson city.
Wow. So when you're talking about the stakes being high there, I mean, that is an understatement for Kiev. And yet, as you mentioned, I mean, they have been messing around for the last month. They decided, hey, we're going to launch this incursion into Russia's Kursk region. And then the mainstream media here in the West acted as if they were accomplishing something. The CIA, right? Exactly. The CIA chief is going, yeah, you know, we're really applauding them. Well, that's all fine and good until Russia launches a counteroffensive against Kiev's forces in the region.
Well,
so
actually, I would say that the counteroffensive is almost a denouement, because it's Russian strikes that over the last 6 weeks with drones, with Lancets, with artillery, with rocket systems, with glide bombs that have decimated all of the Western military equipment out here in the open, surrounded on three sides by Russia. David Axe at Forbes even did a piece saying that the Kiev regime was losing equipment, Western equipment, hard to replace in the Kursk region at a rate more than double what they were in actually defendable fortified positions, say in the Donbass and East Ukraine. So at this point, the counteroffensive, it's almost a denouement, because the reports are that the Kiev regime has no vehicles left for its troops to defend themselves. And they certainly don't have any fortifications in podunk Russian villages in the Kursk region. So this was a strategic blunder of catastrophic proportions.
Yeah, I just want to know who, whether it was Washington, London, what geniuses came up with this. And we're like, you know what? We should take forces away from the front line, send them literally into Russia just for what? For a few weeks of headlines to make it look like they were doing something. I mean, it feels so often like no one is actually looking at the bigger picture or the long game, even if that's just past the upcoming election. Is it really, do you think, that short-sighted when it comes to some of these decisions that they're making?
Okay, so first of all, I think it's pretty clear, the Russian government's pretty clear that the real, as far as there was a strategic target, it was to seize the Kursk nuclear power plant and use that as some type of blackmail and leverage. Well, that didn't work out. They weren't able to grab it fast enough. Russia got reinforcements into this otherwise strategic backwater, and so if that was the goal, it was lost. The Kiev regime's General Sersky has proposed that Russia could have launched an offensive towards Kiev through Sumy from the Kursk region. Well, they're likely to do so now for sure, once they've repelled this Kursk incursion. The idea that they could get them to pull troops out of the Donbass and slow down Russian advance in Pokrovsk that way, the exact opposite happened. They pulled troops from already collapsing defensive lines in the Donbass for this fool's crusade in Kursk. So it was actually 100% opposite. Now they're actually trying to rush troops back from Kursk that had been sent there, because Pokrovsk is now dominating the headlines. And I really think they react more strangely to Western media's headlines and the information war than they do to any military strategic sense. And then the last is probably, you know, the holy grail all along is they know they can't beat Russia on the battlefield. So the only hope is to politically destabilize the country. I mean, whether economic sanctions or destroying the Crimean, attempts to destroy the Crimean bridge, or this Kursk incursion, or attacking residential buildings with drones. It's all about trying to make the Russian people afraid, so they turn their support away from the Russian intervention, from the SMO, and from the Putin, the Russian government. And it's again and again and again, it's just created a further rally around the flag effect and increased public support. So they really do not understand Russia or the Russian people. They have very, very bad, ideologically driven Russian experts like Vicki Nuland that keep giving them very bad analysis and advice. And it has led them to this desperate situation.
Yeah, I guess when you have CNN with the headline "outsmarted and outgunned," it's not looking good for the Kiev regime. And yet, as always seems to be the case, they did this one to themselves. Certainly a lot at stake here all around. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. International relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda, thanks so much for your time and insight.
Thanks for having me.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. If you want to support my work, you can also check out my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. That's where you can sign up as a monthly paid subscriber and join the community there. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.